You already know. That's the part no explanation accounts for. The friends who've quietly stopped asking. The framework you found at 2 in the morning that named the pattern perfectly. The list you made once, actual bullet points, clear-eyed, laid out like evidence of exactly what this is doing to you. You've done the reading. You've had the conversation with yourself 100 times, and the 101st version is no clearer than the first was. You see it. You've been seeing it for months, maybe years. And you're still there, or you left and came back. Or you're watching yourself edge back right now and you can't fully explain why to anyone, including yourself. So let me be precise about what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to explain what a toxic relationship looks like, because you don't need that. I'm going to explain what's happening inside the specific mind of a person who sees one clearly and stays anyway. And I want to warn you before we start, the explanation is not going to be comfortable, because the problem is not in the relationship. The problem is in the reward system, and the reward system is yours. Stay with me. This one doesn't end where you think. B.F. Skinner in the 1950s ran an experiment that should make you uncomfortable every time you pick up a phone. He was testing reward schedules, the patterns by which a system delivers a signal, and he found that the most powerful schedule wasn't the most generous one. It wasn't constant reward. A pigeon that gets a pellet every time it presses a lever will press the lever when it wants a pellet and stop when it doesn't. Reliable, reasonable, easily extinguished. The schedule that couldn't be extinguished, the one that produced behavior so compulsive it looked like madness, was this: reward, sometimes unpredictably, with no pattern the animal could detect or anticipate, variable ratio. The pigeon doesn't know if the next press will produce the pellet, so it never stops pressing. Skinner found this in birds. Neurobiologist Robert Sapolsky found out why it works in brains. The dopamine signal, the one your nervous system reads as "this matters, pay attention, stay," doesn't fire when you receive the reward. It fires in the moment of uncertainty just before. Not the good day. The moment when you don't know yet if this is going to be a good day. The maybe is the neurochemical event. The anticipation is the hit. Now run that through your own history with this person. The good moments hit differently than they would with someone consistent. They land harder, they mean more, they feel like proof of something. They feel that way because they are preceded by not knowing. Because your dopamine system was primed by the uncertainty and the reward arrives into a brain already flooded with anticipation. A slot machine doesn't work because people are stupid. It works because the human nervous system is an anticipation machine and someone figured out how to feed it perfectly. You are not weak. You're not broken. Your brain is executing exactly what it evolved to execute, under conditions that were designed not by this person, not intentionally, but by the structure of the thing to be maximally difficult to leave. But here's the detail the neuroscience leaves out. It explains why the lever is hard to put down. It doesn't explain why you walked into this specific casino. And that question is older and harder than dopamine. It lives in something called attachment, and it was written into you before you had any say in the matter. In the 1960s, a psychologist named Mary Ainsworth built a study so simple it looks cruel in retrospect. A mother, a stranger, a baby in a room with a one-way mirror. She watched what happened when the mother left. She watched what happened when the mother returned, and the babies sorted themselves into patterns that have held up in 60 years of replication. The securely attached infants were upset when their mothers left. When she returned, they settled. Threat resolved, system reset. The anxious infants, the ones whose mothers had been warm but inconsistent, attentive sometimes and elsewhere others, didn't mourn the absence cleanly. When the mother came back, they couldn't be soothed by her either. They reached and pulled away simultaneously. They had learned before they had language or theory that the source of comfort was also the source of the threat of its removal, and their nervous systems had not resolved that paradox, so they stayed alert. They stayed in the moment just before the pellet, permanently. John Bowlby, who built the architecture Ainsworth was working inside, described attachment as a biological system that runs beneath thought, beneath decision, beneath preference, beneath what you believe about yourself and what you deserve. You don't consciously select who you attach to the way you select a restaurant. The system selects. And if what it was calibrated on was unreliability, warmth that arrived unpredictably, love that had to be earned back, safety that came and went, then the system will read unreliability as familiar, and familiar to a nervous system is the same signal as safe. This is the part I need you to sit with. Consistency. Someone who shows up without requiring anything in return, whose warmth doesn't vary with their mood, who is simply and plainly available, doesn't feel like safety to an anxiously calibrated nervous system. It feels suspicious, flat, like something must be wrong with them. And volatility, warmth that appears and disappears, a person you have to track and read and manage, doesn't feel like instability. It feels like attention. It feels like presence. It feels somewhere underneath a part of you that knows better, like what love is supposed to feel like. Not because you don't know what love is, because you learned what it feels like in the body before your cortex had any say in the curriculum. Bessel van der Kolk spent decades studying what the nervous system does with experiences the thinking mind can't fully process, and his finding is one of the most important and least comfortable in the literature. The body doesn't bond on joy, it bonds on intensity. Cortisol and adrenaline, the chemistry of crisis, are also the chemistry of deep memory formation. Whatever happens in their presence gets written in larger font. The nervous system doesn't file it as warning, it files it as significant. Think about what that means for a relationship built on cycles. Every rupture, every reconciliation, every night you didn't know which version would walk through the door. Your body was encoding those as formative, as close, not as damage, as the texture of intimacy. The crisis and the making up run on the same circuit, processed by the same system, weighted by the same intensity. There is no stable, quiet, uncomplicated person alive who can compete with that tally. Because the tally isn't measuring happiness, it's measuring heat. So here's the thing I need you to hold. The attachment is real. The feeling is genuine. I'm not going to tell you that what you feel is an illusion or a pathology, because it isn't. You are genuinely, physiologically, deeply bonded to this person, but you have been misreading what you're bonded to. It isn't them, it's the neurochemical state they reliably produce in you. The longing, the alertness, the specific quality of ache when they're absent, those are real, but they existed before this person. They existed as a frequency. This person simply turned out to broadcast on it. And if the frequency is old enough, if a nervous system learned it somewhere before you had words for what was happening, before you had a way to check its source, then you didn't fall into something accidental with them. You recognized something, and you moved toward it the way a radio moves toward the station it was built to receive. Freud called it Wiederholungszwang, the compulsion to repeat. He found it in his patients in a pattern so consistent it troubled him. People returning, across relationships and contexts and decades, to the same dynamic, not because they enjoyed suffering, but because the scene had never resolved. There was something in the original experience that hadn't closed, and the unconscious, which has no language and no calendar, kept staging the same scene in new theaters, with new actors looking for the ending that would finally let the account balance. You are not in love with this person the way you think you are. You're in love with what it would mean if this ended differently. If this one stayed. If this one finally chose you without you having to earn it back. If this specific combination of warmth and withdrawal, presence and disappearance resolved for once, in your favor and held. Not because of them, because of who they remind something in you of. Because the role your nervous system cast them in was written before you ever met, and they happen to audition perfectly for it. They are not the protagonist of the story you're trying to heal. They are the casting. And here's what makes this almost impossible to see from inside it. The scene feels urgent. It feels meaningful in a way other relationships haven't. It feels like it matters more because it does. You're not just in a relationship, you're in the resolution attempt of something older. And the part of you running that attempt doesn't know this person's name, it just knows the frequency. And it will not stop tuning until the station finally changes. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly before you reach for the comfortable version. Think of the moment in this relationship when you felt most alive, most present, most real, most there. Was it a slow, ordinary day, something quiet, something easy, nothing at stake? Or was it the edge of something? The argument that almost ended it, the morning they came back, the 10 minutes after the worst of it passed, and something between you was raw and close in a way it never was otherwise. Most of you just answered, and the answer is the thing you haven't wanted to name. Because if the aliveness lives at the edge, if the realest you've ever felt in this is in the middle of almost losing it, then what you're afraid of losing isn't this person. It's the version of yourself that only exists inside the uncertainty. The one who is most present when the stakes are highest, most focused when the threat is closest, most alive in the exact conditions that are destroying you. Calm doesn't feel like home, it feels like waiting for something to go wrong. Safety doesn't feel like love, it feels like being forgotten. And if that's the frequency, if that is what your nervous system was built for, then the relationship isn't the problem you think it is. The relationship is the most honest thing in your life. It's the one place you're not pretending. And the reason you can't leave isn't fear or weakness or love. It's that you don't know who you are without the noise. Here's what I'll leave you with. Not the answer. I don't have it. But the exact question you've been not asking. Imagine this fully resolved. Not the dramatic version. Not them leaving. Not you leaving in fire. A quiet close. Debt paid, account balanced, nothing owed. The wound healed. The scene finally finished. What do you do the day after? Not practically. Who are you? In the silence, in the absence of the waiting. Because if the waiting was there before this person, if you can trace it back past them, past the last one, back to a room you barely remember, then you're not afraid of losing them. You are afraid of the quiet room. And somewhere underneath everything you've built around that frequency, the relationships it chose, the chemistry it called love, the destruction it called being alive, there is something that never agreed to any of it. Something that was there before the first lesson. Something quiet. Find out if it's still running. Then decide which one of you came here to understand the chemistry, and which one already knew the formula by heart.